I want to talk about a vision today, but at first I want to talk a little bit about some things that I've been picking up as I get around, and I mix among different people, and I'm also paying attention to what's happening in different groups and Christians. Some people are concerned about things happening in Australia. Do you know what happens if, who could have thought if your view in some points of your own moral compass that points you in a certain direction, if your view is no longer welcome in society? Could that happen in Australia? People who hold a conservative view on the family and home and what marriage is and how it's defined, and people are concerned about that now. Can you imagine being prosecuted for talking on the city footpath about something that you believe? Imagine that. Most of the things I'm going to mention are known, but perhaps you didn't know this, so I'll go in a little bit of detail. There's a lady in Melbourne who believes that the unborn have rights, and she used to stand on the footpath and talk to people who are headed into abortion clinics and see if they needed some support, if there was something she could do to help them that might change their mind. Well, Victoria passed a law to make it unlawful to communicate on the subject within a radius of those clinics. And she was prosecuted and given a criminal conviction for handing out a little piece of paper to someone on the footpath. The High Court in the last couple of months upheld that conviction, so now she's a criminal in Australia. Who would have thought, people are saying, who would have thought that this would happen? And of course, what if you lose your job for talking publicly about your faith? That couldn't happen in Australia, could it? Not necessarily going to comment on these situations really, but just that question. What's the solution though? Because could the pendulum swing another way? You know, a number of years ago was invited to a meeting of the younger members of a particular conservative party in another state here in Australia. And I went along because I was invited. I had some interesting conversations. And of course, they were all Christians. They were all very evangelical, conservative sort of Christians. And they were concerned about where things are going. And we had many of those ideas in common, many of those concerns in common. But I posed a question, because they were advocating about Christians becoming involved in trying to shift the public opinion or laws and things, or trying to stand up for Christians' rights. And I just asked a question. I said, what would happen if Christians gained the power? What would happen? Would Christians respect the rights of others if we were in charge? If we had the upper hand? And do you know what they said? These young people, they were sitting around in this group, and the group was silent for a moment, and then someone said, yes, but that will never happen. That will never happen. Could it happen in Australia that there's a surprise election result for a conservative candidate? Nobody thought it was going to happen. Could that happen in Australia, like it happened in the USA? Could it happen in Australia that we might follow in the footsteps of the United States and let's get back to God? Could it happen one day that liberty would be restricted by enforcing religious observance in Australia? Could the pendulum swing? Well, I'm just posing questions here, but some of these questions that I'm asking have been answered recently, haven't they? And so what I want us to do is we look at the state of the world and the different sort of divided factions in this world, each vying for something. Where's Jesus in the middle of that? And what does he want you and me to do? What is it that he wants us to be about doing with our energy, with our influence? What is it that he wants us to do? It's helpful for us. We've been talking in the last couple of months here in New South Wales and across between the workers here and things about updating our mission, our vision statement, our mission statement, and having some strategies so we are together on, all right, what is it that we are going to do? How are we going to tackle the job that we have? What is it and how are we going to do it? That's called your mission, your vision, and how you're going to work on it. It's important for us, when we're talking about these things, to look to the end of the story's end, right? And we are unique as people who believe the Bible in that this book goes not only into the past, talks not only about things of the present, but what else? What else do we find in here? The future. So is it possible for us to read the end of the story? Yes, it is, isn't it? To go to the end of the story and read. And I'd just like to get some inspiration from the very last chapter of this book, Revelation 22, and some inspiration from what does it say about the end of the story. Revelation 22 from verse 1, "And he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. And in the midst of the street of it, and on either side of the river, was there the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And there shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall serve him. And they shall see his face, and his name shall be in their foreheads. And there shall be no night there, and they need no candle, neither light of the sun. For the Lord God giveth them light, and they shall reign forever and ever." Question, are you looking forward to this? Are you looking forward to paradise? To a place where there's no more curse, there's no more pain, and we often read some of these verses at funerals because we want to know that there will be one day no more pain, no more crying, no more sickness, no sorrow, no death. We want to know that there is a hope for a better life beyond this. And while we believe that we should be the best and get the best in the life that we have here, but yet there is another reckoning. There's a reckoning in another life to come. And so that's the light at the end. The light at the end. But meanwhile, what about in this world? Now, what did Jesus say when he came in John chapter 8 and verse 12? Jesus said, "I am the light of the world. He that followeth in me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life." So on this world, Jesus came as the light. And in fact, when Jesus came as the light that lightens the world, is Jesus' light restricted to those who follow him and believe in him? Those who say that they follow Jesus? Is that right? Light restricted to those people? Did Jesus only come for those who would say they would be his followers, who would commit to following him? We must not forget this. John 1:9 says that was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. You see, every person receives light from Jesus, receives an illumination. We must not forget that we are only in cooperation with heaven on this world, that Jesus is in charge. And he's interested in every single person on the planet. If Jesus were here today, what would he do? He would get about the place, and what would Jesus do as he would mix around among people? What do you think? What would Jesus do if he were here today? He would help people, wouldn't he? He would bring healing and help and sympathy to people. But would Jesus only do that for people who would come to church? Listen, you come to church and I'll help you. Is that what Jesus would do? No, Jesus was indiscriminate about, he would help everyone. It says that he's the light that lights everyone that comes into the world. That would be Jesus today. Well, when he was giving instructions to us, his followers, and of course he is the light of the world, but what did he give to you and to me? What place did he give us in the world? Matthew 5:14 says, "Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid." What role did Jesus give to us in this world today? He says, you are the light of the world. And so when we're thinking about being the light, it must be the same light that shines from Jesus. Must be the light that shines from us. The way that he was must be the way that we are. So back to the end of the story in Revelation 22. There's a call in verse 17. "And the Spirit and the bride say, Come, and let him that heareth say, Come. and let him that is athirst come, and whosoever will, let him take the water of life freely. So there's a call that we are given to repeat, because the Spirit and the bride say, come. Now in Revelation 22 here, the bride is the New Jerusalem. It's the inheritance of God's people. And that inheritance calls and says, come. And now the one who hears the call should also do what? Should say what? The one who hears should repeat the call, say, come. And let him that is athirst come, and whosoever will, let him take the water of life freely. That's to be our call. To invite people to come, to taste. If you're thirsty, if you have the desire that's not fulfilled, the Lord is calling you and to come. And there's also this promise in the same chapter, a few verses before, behold, I come quickly. Blessed is he that keepeth the sayings of the prophecy of this book. And so obviously, this book, not only the book of Revelation, but the whole book is to be our message. And we are to give that invitation and to show the sympathy and love of Jesus to a world who needs it. So here we are in the middle of a changing world, in a world where there's more questions than answers, it looks like. What is it that we should be doing? Now, we read in the beginning that there's a verse that we read in the key text. Who remembers what it was? Arise and shine. So Jesus said, you're the light of the world. What is it that he wants us to do? Arise and what? Arise and shine. You know, it's interesting, in the same book of Isaiah, you know, often references we hear made to the Old Testament. The Old Testament's a very dry, very, hard sort of, but it's not. If you look in verses like these, but Isaiah 43 is another passage that says, you are my witnesses, saith the Lord, and my servant whom I have chosen, that ye may know and believe me and understand that I am he. And it goes on, but he says that you are my witnesses. Now, what is a witness? A witness. What is a witness? If you think about it, because what we've done is we've taken the word witness and we've created it, we've made it into a verb, right? We've made witness into a verb. And it has a meaning that witness is something that you go out on a Sunday and you do. We get together, or on a Sabbath afternoon, you go out and you do. But what is a witness? So a witness is a person, yes? And that person, what about that person? They've seen something, right? They know something. When a court calls a witness, it's because it's someone who knows something. So what is it? He says, you are my witnesses. Why? Because you know. You know and believe me. You understand. You are my witnesses. So a witness is someone who knows something and they can share that something. Yes? So here's a question. Do I know Jesus? Do you know Jesus? Do we know Jesus in a way that we cannot hold it in? We are a witness to what we've seen and heard. Do you know the first witness to the resurrected Lord was, when the women came to the tomb and they found that there was no Jesus, and they became the first witnesses. And what did they do? Did they sort of wander off and go, we're not sure where Jesus... what did they say? They were excited. They couldn't keep it in. And the disciples who went, and they took a while. I think the disciples took a while for it to dawn on them. But let's take the two on the road to Emmaus. And when they saw Jesus, they came back and they were witnesses. But they couldn't hold it in. They were excited. They had something. They wanted to share it. That's light, isn't it? Isn't that light? That's the light of the world. That's the kind of light where Jesus said, a city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. You can't escape it. You can't hide it. And so, of course, we know that when we come into the kingdom of God, every true disciple is born into the kingdom of God. And what do they automatically become? Every true disciple is born as a missionary. Now, not everyone's witness is the same. Not everyone's role is the same, but I believe that everyone has something to do for Jesus. And so every time we have a baptism, I've been in the habit of reminding the church, all right, you have a new soul that's come into fellowship. What do you need to do? One more has come in. Now, that person needs something to do, because every disciple is born as a missionary. Gospel Workers also says that all who have received Christ, ministers and lay members, are to arise and shine, for great peril is right upon us. Satan is stirring up the powers of earth. Everything in this world is in confusion. God calls upon His people to hold aloft the banner bearing the message of the third angel. And so we are called to hold up the banner, to be, he says, you are my witnesses. You know, and so bear witness to what you know. Sometimes, though, we get a little comfortable. Isn't that right? Now, I hear stories from the days before the fall of communism in Europe, and I never cease to be amazed. I love to sit and listen to those stories. I really do. And I love to hear the stories about how things were in a place where people were not free. They did not have freedom to act and to go about in the way that I'm used to. Because in the country that I grew up in, now in Australia, we were free. You can pretty much do anything you want, right? Within reason, and we're free to associate like this. Under the same sun, on the same day today, we have brothers and sisters in other countries that do not have the freedom to associate freely. And so every time they get together, there's a possibility that they'll be arrested. Still today, still happening in some places, right? There's a possibility that someone will have betrayed them, or somehow they would have been found out, and police will turn up, and that will be the end. And if they escape being imprisoned, they'll have to find a new place to get together and worship. It's still happening. And so we can thank the Lord that we're in a country of peace, can't we? That we have rights and freedoms, and here we are, and we can come together and we have the freedom to do this. But there's something about prosperity and peace that's also a negative, isn't there? What happened to the early church to actually force them to go and do what Jesus said? Jesus said, you'll be my witnesses, and we haven't read this one, but it's in Acts, where he talks about them going out in chapter 1. And Jesus said, you will be witnesses unto me. And he sent them out all around the place. I'm thinking of Acts chapter 1 and verse 8. He says, but you shall receive power after that the Holy Ghost has come upon you. And ye shall be witnesses unto me both in Jerusalem and in all Judea and in Samaria and unto the uttermost part of the earth. So he said Jerusalem and all Judea and Samaria and the whole world. And he said, but wait, he said, you will receive power, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and then go and do this work. Well, they received the power of the Holy Spirit, but you know what happened? What did they do? They stayed around Jerusalem, didn't they? And so God, that's fine, they went on a little bit of time, but the Lord allowed something to take place. What happened to actually push them to do what God said to do? Acts chapter 8 verse 1 says, Saul was consenting unto his death. Now this was the death of Stephen. The previous chapter is the sermon of Stephen, and the fact he was interrupted in that and taken out and was actually stoned to death, which was unprecedented in that time. They hadn't done this until then. This was an extrajudicial execution. When Jesus was crucified, they went to court. When Stephen was stoned, they just dragged him out and they did it. That was the beginning of the persecution. And so from that moment, what happens? Acts chapter 8 verse 1 says, Saul was consenting unto his death. And at that time, there was a great persecution against the church, which was at Jerusalem. And what happened? And they were all scattered abroad throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. So finally, they went. They went everywhere. And I'm pretty sure the next verse says, verse 4 says, therefore they that were scattered abroad went everywhere preaching the word. So you see how God accomplished his purpose for them. They had to be persecuted a bit. And they realized, now they fled because they're fleeing for their lives. But the Lord's purpose was accomplished. So in times of prosperity, here we are. And I think about that and ask myself the question though. Is there a purpose for times of prosperity and peace? is an important thing for us to think about. Because sometimes I sort of vacillate. Sometimes I pray for persecution, and other times I think, well, I'm not ready for that. And other times I pray for prolonging of peace. Well, it's good that we don't make the decisions, that God does. But what should we do in a time of prosperity? And I've thought of a couple of things. So in a time of prosperity, what's unique? Okay, what are we able to do right now? What are we able to do? So we are able to operate freely. Think about it. You can personally advance yourself into a position where you can be more useful, right? I mean, it's very practical. I'm not going to talk a lot about stewardship and things, but I'm thinking about our personal stewardship and our finance. I mean, if you're prospering, pay off your mortgage, right? I know it's not easy in Sydney, but we can give more to the Lord's cause. We can help to support places that are less fortunate. When we have freedom and general economic prosperity, we can actually do more with that, right? We can do more. We have the peace and the prosperity to do that. But that doesn't mean that we have to relax and don't have energy and in the Lord's cause. We have the opportunity. We don't have to work any less enthusiastically in a time of peace and prosperity, do we? We don't have to. We can actually be as earnest as we were, as if we're being persecuted. We have the opportunity to do that. But you know what human nature is, right? Human nature is not that we don't necessarily do that, but we have the time that we actually can do that. And do you know Jesus was like this? I read a line there that commented that Jesus was sort of, I'm not sure if I'm quoting properly, but it says like he was terribly in earnest. Jesus was very earnest. Jesus did not stop and he did not coast along. He knew what he was about. In fact, he says in John chapter 9 and verse 4, he said, I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. Jesus says, I know what I need to do, and now I have the chance. I must be about it. I must do it. Why do you think? What was it that gave Jesus that kind of focus? So he said, I must do this work. While he had the opportunity to do it, I must do it, he said. I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. What gave Jesus that kind of focus? Jesus knew what was ahead. Jesus had a vision, right? Jesus understood what was coming, and everything in his life worked toward that. Do we have the same opportunity to know what's ahead, to know what's in front of us, to have a vision and a mission? Do we have that? We have that opportunity, don't we? And so this reminds me of an experience I had when we were living in Melbourne, and putting on the project we have tomorrow at Wentworthville Church to put on the new roof. So I have that memory going back where we actually did that on our house. We had a farmhouse outside of Melbourne, and came time to put on the roof. And if you could know what the weather was going to be, think about that, right? If you could know what the weather was going to be, it would give more or less some more energy to the project. Because what happened was we worked really hard all day, and then someone who was helping me said, look, I'm just going to tack down this other sheet here and put a couple of screws in it. Should be right. So in the middle of the night, the wind came up, and I had this sheet of tin flapping on the roof, So now in the middle of the night, when it's hard, when it's difficult, when you can't really do it, yet I'm climbing up there, and it starts to rain, and, water's coming inside the house, and in the middle of the night, I'm up there finishing what I didn't do in the daytime. Under difficulty, under hardship. If you could know what was going to happen, would you work differently? Maybe you would. But Jesus gave us some instruction, because in reality, we don't know what tomorrow will bring. We have today's opportunities. We don't know what will happen tomorrow. And Jesus actually, although he gave us an outline of future events, for our day-to-day life, Jesus gave us something different. Mark chapter 13 says in verse 34, for the Son of Man is as a man taking a far journey, who left his house and gave authority to his servants and to every man his work, and commanded the porter to what? To watch. In reality, it's like this. Jesus just gave each of us something to do, and he said to be about that work. And that's what we're to do. I remember when my dad used to do that. And, if he'd go away for the day, my brother and I were at home, he'd give us a list of things to do. And we would assume we knew when he was coming home. What do you think we did? We would sort of calculate things, and we would think, all right, if Dad's coming home at 4 o'clock, we reckon, then after lunch we better get into it. Right? After lunch. And what do you think happened when Dad came home for lunch one day? We were caught out. So Jesus, he's gone. He left us here, and he gave us something to do, and he wants us to be about it. There's a little article here in the Review and Herald. God has given to every man his work. He has not left the spiritual interests of the church wholly in the hands of the minister. The porter is to watch, but everyone else has something to do. Then it says, all through our ranks, individual talent has been sadly neglected. A few persons have been selected as spiritual burden bearers, and the talent of other members has remained undeveloped. It's important as a church that we make sure that everyone has something to do, that we're utilizing, because think about that. Every person has a role. Now, they may have a role that's different to my role or your role, but each person has something to do. And isn't it true that if you're willing, you get lumped with lots of things? And sometimes some people who are more willing seem to be, well, ask them, they'll do it, But in fact, each of us has something to do. The burden of church work should be distributed among its individual members so that each one may become an intelligent laborer for God. Each person, to the full possibility, the extent of their ability, should become a laborer for the Lord. There's altogether too much unused force in our churches, it says. The testimonies say in Volume 8, none should move to new places. This goes on now into something else. None should move into new places merely for the sake of worldly advantage. From time to time, people need to move around and go to new places. But we should always have in mind when we do this, that it's not only for myself, but we should remember Jesus said, you are the what? Light of the world. But where there's an opening to obtain a livelihood, let families that are well grounded in the truth enter, 1 or 2 families in a place, to work as what? To work as missionaries. It says they can distribute our publication, hold meetings in their homes, become acquainted with their neighbors, and invite them to come to these meetings. Thus they can let their light shine in good works. So that is something that, as we realize our mission, this we can do. Among our workers here in Sydney, we've identified two new possibilities of opening up, and we've really seriously discussed it. And we want to do it, but we also are aware that you don't want to start more than you can maintain. And so people are needed, people who will be dedicated to do this kind of work, because Jesus said, let your light shine. So I go back to another note in the review, and it says that members of our large churches are not in the most favorable situation for spiritual growth or for development of efficient methods of labor. And it goes on, but I was thinking, what does it mean large? Well, that's very relative, isn't it? And in fact, I don't know of any of our churches who look at themselves and say, we're large. Okay? But what it does tell me, as I go on to the next sentence, they are inclined to let others bear the burdens that the Lord designs all should have a part in carrying. And so that, for me, is a definition, is one of 2 things. A church needs to have everyone working, right? If it's not possible to have everyone working, then what do you think? If it's not possible for everyone to do something, then what might it be? It might be too big. All right? However, it also, if not everyone is doing something, it could also mean that we're not working to our full potential as a congregation. Is that fair to say? That everyone needs something to do. And so large is a relative term. I love to see a congregation where more people are there, more hands, more to work together, more possibilities. But just make sure that everyone has something to do, that you're utilizing that capacity. Because otherwise, if someone can sit back, that's, as a young person, I used to attend a church like that. We actually had 3 exits. Three exits up the back. So the pastor could literally not shake everyone's hand in one go. You could come to church, you could go through Sabbath school and all of the services, and you could leave and not realize that someone had attended because there were that many people. There was not enough for everyone to do. So I think that was large. And my father said to my mother, we need to do something for our own spiritual life and our own responsibility to souls. Let's go somewhere else where we can be useful. And they did. And so I think that was a really good decision for our family. It says, it is a mistake for our people to crowd together in large numbers. It is not in harmony with God's plans. So my comment today is not about the size of the congregation, but that simply everyone needs something to do. And everyone should be about that. And if you feel that you have an opportunity that presents you on a horizon of going into a new place, God bless you, please do it. Because isn't that what Jesus said? And He might give us something else to help us to do that work if He feels we're not doing it. So that's for each of us to look into our own heart and life. But by all means, let's be active and busy, right? Let's be busy. Let's do something for the Lord. Now, Jesus says, I need to work because what's coming? The night is coming. There's no better time for us right now to work for God. There's no better time. You know, we especially when we're going about our neighborhoods, encouraging people in health and temperance. And years ago when I was growing up, when you were talking about people, you know, a plant-based diet being better for people, why did we say that? Because we knew it from the Bible. We knew that from the Bible, but you were really flat out finding science to back that up at the time because it just wasn't coming out. You know, science was still grappling and trying to understand this. It was slow in coming on. But today, if you go to your neighbors and you encourage them in better health for a plant-based diet, guess what you have right behind you? You've got all the science coming up behind you, and there's no better time for us to be out there helping people because we're in a world that's, you know, we're living longer, but quality of life is not going with it later in life. And so it's the decisions earlier in life, it's the things that people are doing that are catching up with them later. And there's no better time for us than now to get out there and be encouraging that kind of work. If you're looking for a way to bless your neighborhood, you know, poverty is not such a big thing here, even though we do have it in Australia, but people don't have their health. And government is trying to encourage people. You know, the guidelines are getting better, and in the United States they're doing this as well. The guidelines are going this way, and the health statistics are going, guess where? They're going this way. And so there's no better time to be out there and helping people with things that we can share about lifestyle and about taking care of themselves. And of course, helping them to realize that there's a reason behind this. There's a Creator who made you, who loves you, who sees infinite value in you. And that's the reason why we believe my body is not my own. So there's all of these wonderful things of gospel that come into it. So we have a time of prosperity, but we also understand, Jesus says, work while it's day because the night is coming. You will not always have the opportunities that you have. In Romans 13, it mentions this kind of thing. It says, in that knowing the time that is now, it's high time to awake out of sleep. For now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. And if you think about that for a minute, is there ever a time when that's less true? You know, each day that goes by, this statement becomes more true, doesn't it? For now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. Every day brings us nearer to that time. So then the apostle writes, the night is far spent. The day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness and let us put on the armor of light. So he's talking now, there's a time now to do something. There's a time for action. Let's be about it. And it's interesting, we've been reading as a family the book Steps to Christ. And it talks about our personal relationship with Jesus and faith and trusting in Him and His grace. And it's interesting that it says here that there's one way to grow in grace. Because do you ever want more faith? Do you ever want more of the Lord's presence in your life? More peace of mind? You know, there's one way it says to grow in grace. You link up with Jesus, you follow Him, and now when I follow Jesus, guess what He does? Where does He lead? It says here in Steps to Christ, the only way to grow in grace is to be disinterestedly doing the very work which Christ has enjoined upon us, to engage to the extent of our ability in helping and blessing those who need the help we can give them. What's the way to grow? To bless others. Now there's a word here, disinterested, and I don't want to just pass over it because it's important. Do you know what disinterested means? It does not mean uninterested. Disinterested means impartial. In other words, what's in it for you? What's in it for you? Disinterested means there is no direct benefit to me. There's no reason why I'm doing this except to actually help people. Think about that. Disinterestedly doing the work. Why do you do it? You know why someone knocks on the door to sell you, to change your electricity provider? I don't know if that happened here in Sydney, but in Melbourne we had them everywhere, and people started putting up signs, don't knock, because it was too much, right? Well, that's not disinterested, is it? There's a reason they're there. There's a reason they're there to talk to you. Oh, how are you going? Yeah, good. Well, what do you want? And there was a reason. But disinterested actually meant, that's the definition of what Jesus did. He went around and it says He healed. When He went to a village, they brought out all the sick. And who did He pick to heal? He didn't, right? It says that when He left, He'd healed everyone. And so that's the example that we have. All right, that's disinterested. So let me go on to the rest of the statement. Strength comes by exercise. Activity is the very condition of life. So growing in grace means to go and actually participate, to work with Jesus to help someone. And strength comes by what? Strength comes by exercise. Activity is the very condition of life. Those who endeavor to maintain Christian life by passively accepting the blessings that come through the means of grace and doing nothing for Christ are simply trying to live by eating without working. Is that a good plan? To eat but not to be active? It's not a good plan, right? Not a good way. And so in the Christian life, if we don't have something to do, if we are not active, then we will not, our spiritual life will not progress. That says, and in the spiritual as in the natural world, this always results in degeneration and decay. A man who would refuse to exercise his limbs would soon lose all power to use them. Thus, the Christian who will not exercise his God-given powers not only fails to grow up into Christ, but loses the strength that he already had. Is it important then that we have something to do for the Lord? Is it important? Yes, it is. It actually is. Important for our spiritual life. And so, what we need is a vision. A vision of the end picture that will then give us a mission, that will then help us to find our place individually in the Lord's work, what He wants us to do. It's not necessary, Steps to Christ in the same place talks about, we need not go to heathen lands or even leave the narrow circle of the home if it is there that our duty lies in order to work for Christ. So when we want to work for Jesus, where do we look? Where do we start? Within your circle. Don't think that you need to widen your circle before you can work for the Lord. You work within your circle, and guess what? When you are faithful in your circle, no matter how big it is, what happens to that circle? It then broadens. And so each of us have a work to do that's within arm's reach for each of us. We can do this in the home circle, in the church, among those with whom we associate and with whom we do business. And so God has given each of us an opportunity to work for Him. Something we should do then is, before you start your day, before you go out into the world or into your daily activity, what is the question we should ask of God? The prayer that we should pray. We should ask for His peace and His blessing, yes. And I love that prayer where it says to take my heart and to mold me and fashion me, and it says to raise me up into a pure and holy atmosphere. Does anyone finish that quote? Raise me into a pure and holy atmosphere where the rich current of thy love can flow through my soul. And that last bit, where the rich current of thy love can flow through my soul, means something. When current can flow, what does it mean? When current can flow, you have a connection. But for current to flow, you need more than one connection. Think about that. Is that right? You need more than one connection for current to flow. You need a connection to the source, but you need another connection. And so when we are coming into fellowship with God, the current is meant to actually flow somewhere else, where the rich current of thy love can flow through my soul. So that is to somebody else to be a blessing. And that's spiritual power. God didn't place us here to just, be a vessel to accept all the blessing and do nothing. He gave us a job to do. So we need a vision. And I think of a few things that should automatically be a part of our focus as we consider what does God want us to do as a church. I have about 5 points I wanted to just quickly glance across, but I want us to think about some things. As individuals, we have our circle, but as a church here, as a congregation, we have our circle. We have the neighborhood that we are in. We have the place that we operate here. What is it that people need? What is it that we can do to be a blessing to people here? We're the only church for at least some radius. And so here we are. We have an opportunity for people's spiritual, physical, mental well-being. What is it we can do? And we're actually doing some very good things, and I'm quite happy with that. I think that let's solidify, let's make sure we're then focused on this. And what more does God want us to do in this circle that we have? Our Sabbath school. We've had seminars here. I think many of us have got an idea what the Sabbath school can do and extend its reach and the work of the Sabbath school. So these are things to think about. And specifically, part of this is the old term is medical missionary work, but it's about health and temperance. It's about helping people. There's a lot we can do with community education, and there's probably something we can do in further training and education of ourselves to be sure that we can give the best information and the best help for people. Something about extending into new areas, that when a living thing grows, how does it grow? If you think about on a cellular biological level, how does something that's alive actually grow? It actually grows by dividing, and that division produces growth. And so, we need to always have that in our vision, so that at least we have a mindset of reaching out and pushing out and reaching out. We have a lot of potential in our young people, but we must never forget that young people don't come up and automatically know everything and know how to work for the Lord and know all the answers. And so we need to invest in education and training. That's a really, really important thing that we need to do, and invest in the future. Because those of us we've been in here a while and we know how to do things, we may be satisfied to keep going like that, but who's going to hold the future? Who's going to carry things in the future? So we need to invest in that now. And I think there's more that we can do in publication and media, because we do live in a free country and we're still free to exercise that voice. So make use of it. Make use of all these things. You see, when you get these different elements like this to get together, and you put Jesus in the center, and you have a vision of what is it that God has given us in opportunities and talents, what is it that He wants us to do, then have some energy to that vision to make it happen, to keep going. Let's not be satisfied to come here week by week, just do the things that we're used to, but let's have a vision of the future. As we see the world around us and all of those unanswered questions, let's be about the work that God has for us to do. As we read in the beginning, Isaiah 60 verse 1, arise, read it with me, arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. Brothers and sisters, let us shine. Let us be about what the Lord has for us to do, to be a light in some way, big or small, to the people around us. Amen.